they're not really our opinions. They're these socially approved, prepackaged, mass-marketed products. So opinions have been replaced with products. This is going to Getugly. I was having another online debate about the issue of climate change. And I think it's instructive to look at the way people who support the premise of catastrophic man-made climate change debate the issue. Because what I've found is it doesn't matter how many of these kinds of debates I have, I keep encountering the exact same arguments and the exact same resorting to memes and the same slogans, different people using almost identical language to defend and justify their support for the premise of catastrophic man-made climate change. And my feeling is that when you encounter different people over long periods of time using the exact same phrases and slogans and justifications, then it's clear you're not dealing with people who are thinking for themselves about the issue. It makes me very suspicious that people are simply internalizing something that they've heard someone else say or they've read somewhere, and they are substituting this for an informed opinion that they've taken the time to develop themselves. And I think this points to a bigger underlying issue in the culture in general, where we've tended to fob off the responsibility for critical thinking about these big issues to a kind of a thinking class. And these are people generally who have been identified as being way smarter than the rest of us, usually scientists. And so now we have the luxury of relieving ourselves of any responsibility to scrutinize what these people say, because we wouldn't understand it anyway. So in the same way that we have people, say in the trades, to do our heavy lifting for us because we don't want to do it, we have people in this intellectual class to do our heavy thinking for us because we don't want to do it. And it's convenient, right? Because it gives us a kind of social cover, and we can have all the moral and ethical and intellectual validation without having to do any of the work ourselves. We can simply adopt these prepackaged, very well marketed opinions that come preloaded with these desirable social affirmations and all the values that are currently fashionable. And for the low, low price of surrendering all intellectual autonomy, I now get to consider myself as part of the club of well-informed, clever people who value scientific rigor and evidence-based reasoning and all of that stuff that smart people do. And oh look, they've even thrown in a sense of moral superiority and self-righteousness as a bonus as well. So that's a deal, folks. And, you know, it's handy for us, too, because we don't really have to take responsibility for our opinions anymore, because they're not really our opinions. They're these socially approved, prepackaged, mass-marketed products. So opinions have been replaced with products. And I suppose it's the inevitable path that a profoundly consumerist society will take. So you start with McHappy Meals and you end up with McHappy Thoughts. And this corporatization of opinion really seems to have reached some kind of crescendo with the issue of man-made climate change. So in the same way they market running shoes to us by attaching desirable lifestyle characteristics of health and vitality and vigor to the product, so that we buy the product and we feel like we're somehow identifying with the lifestyle. In the same way, they've marketed climate change to us by linking it to desirable values that convey social acceptance. So if you're someone who desires intellectual validation, if that enhances your self image, then you're going to be very susceptible to a marketing strategy that packages the man made climate change opinion product as a proven fact that no credible scientist disputes. And in today's society, it is the scientific class who are perceived as the ultimate intellectual elites. So it's to them that people look for intellectual validation. And this, of course, is why they keep pounding us with this notion of there being a consensus. And it's why we keep seeing this 97% of scientists agree meme repeated over and over again.
It's not one person versus the other person, it's 97 people versus 3 people.
And it's documented by 97%.
Some 97%.
97%.
97% of
97%.
And likewise, since people who want moral validation don't seek it from religious institutions in our culture so much anymore, the urge has been displaced into other realms. And one of the most pervasive of these realms these days is the natural environment. So this religious instinct for shame and repentance and penance resulting from sinning against the perfection of God has shifted to shame and repentance and penance for sinning against the perfection of nature. So if you sell the acceptance of man-made climate change as absolutely obligatory for anyone who claims to seriously care about the environment, then those whose sense of moral validation is grounded in a kind of hard on their sleeve style of environmentalism will buy your opinion product without even a second thought. So you tend to see these two distinct streams when you're debating people about the climate change issue. And people either assume for themselves the pedestal of intellectual superiority or the pedestal of moral superiority. And they're often very good at repeating these memes and these slogans and cutting and pasting charts and diagrams and data and quotes from various websites that support the climate change agenda. But what they're not so good at is addressing direct criticism of their own critical thinking skills. And they're also not very enthusiastic about objectively and rationally dealing with valid and credible scientific criticism about the man-made climate change theory when it's presented to them, which is weird because they're supposed to be all about valuing the scientific method, which is predicated on the notion of scrutinizing any given hypothesis and identifying any potential flaws in the premise. Now, I'm a little curious about how you go about doing that when your initial assumption is that all criticism is by definition invalid. But again, this is the purpose of adopting these opinion products, these O products, because you get to claim that you value critical thinking skills and evidence-based reasoning without having to make the effort to do any critical thinking or evidence-based reasoning yourself.